2017 project of the month. As DJ said, this is called a Sweet Blossom Recipe Towel. And this month's project is actually from a You Design It collection, and it's called Sweet Blossom. I'm going to real quickly toggle over to my software so I can just illustrate this for you. I'm going to open up a new document. This is the You Design It tool. I'm going to go down into this Sweet Blossom collection, and I just want to emphasize for those of you that are software owners, if you're not taking advantage of this You Design It tool, it is such a wonderful feature. It allows you to custom build designs. And so with the Sweet Blossom collection, this is one of my favorites. When I look at this collection, it has frames that you can use. So you start with a frame, and the You Design It means you create your own design. So once I've got a frame in there, and I'll have multiple frames, and I'll put it in 3D just so that you can see that. Then you come over and you select a floral element to go in it. The reason why I love this collection, I am a quilter, and I think that this would make a beautiful focal point for quilt blocks. And so if that is on my list of things to do. So let me go ahead and close that. I'm going to go back over into my PowerPoint. And so that's where it comes from. So these are the frame elements. These are the floral elements. And then it also has, if you can see here with my cursor, vase elements with flowers that go into it. So there are infinite possibilities when you start building out your own custom design. So I love this collection. And of course, in the handout, it has your project construction. So this is the handout. You want to make sure that you print it off. Okay. As far as the objectives for this month go, it's all about working with fonts and microfonts. And in the last update, and hopefully you did install your most recent update, there were multiple enhancements to fonts within our software. So you have the ability to categorize fonts, to filter fonts, and things like that. So we are going to focus on playing with fonts this month, and specifically microfonts. We're going to ungroup and regroup a design. We're going to modify it. We're going to duplicate design elements using the selection tool. This was another enhancement in the software, the selection tools. We'll do a copy and paste from text, and then we'll optimize that design. So we're actually going to be doing, this is a pretty software intensive project this month. As far as your materials, I put down as a skill level that this is intermediate. I think beginners, of course, you can do this project, but because it's more software intensive, if you're a beginner to the software, you might want to have some guidance with it. There really isn't any sewing required. We're going to build a design in the software, and then we're going to stitch it out on a towel, a dish towel, a blank. So you want to make sure that you have your software. I did put down specific threads this month, and usually when I put together a project, my philosophy is choose the threads that you want, choose the colors that you want. But I think that with this month's design, if you use the colors that the design was created in, I think it really maintains the integrity of the beauty of the design. I also used one of our newer products, and we have the Quilter Select product line, and within that product line, we now have two types of threads. We have a 60 weight, and we have an 80 weight. The 60 weight is called Quilter Select Perfect Cotton Plus, and what it is it's a polyester core with a long staple Egyptian cotton wrapped around that core. This thread is amazing. It is strong, it is clean, and when you embroider with the thread, it gives you a little bit different look. You can use micro thread, but our micro thread is polyester and it has a very high sheen. So with the Quilter Select Perfect Cotton Plus, you don't have that sheen, so it gives it a little bit different look. We're going to use Floriani Heat and Stay Stabilizers, Heat and Gone Topping, and Embroidery Perfection Tape. So not a lot of materials for this month's project. You will need a high quality dish towel, and I did put down Dunrovens. They're very readily available. I would recommend that you get a solid color. They come in, checks and things like that. I do think that since we are putting a recipe on the towel, you want to be able to read it. And if you stick with a solid color background, then it's going to make that lettering on the recipe towel pop. miscellaneous sewing supplies such as, scissors, iron, and then I did put down spray starch. What I recommend, prepare your towel for the embroidery, and I do this. I laid the towel out and pressed it, and then I lightly misted the towel with water. And I let that water set on the towel, and what it does is it opens up the fibers of the fabric. Once I let it sit for about 5 minutes, or you could just steam it, but you want to open up the fibers of the towel. Then what I did is I used a liquid spray starch, and I heavily starched that towel. So I misted the spray starch all over the towel, and I let that sit so that it soaks into the fibers of the towel, and then I pressed the towel. So it makes it really nice and crisp, and it almost acts as an additional layer of stabilizer. So you will need some kind of a marking implement also. I put down a friction pen. I've been using these for years. I love them. I've never had any kind of issues with them. They work really, really well. So I use the friction pen, but feel free to use whatever temporary marking implement that you want. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the software lesson because, as I said, it's a little more lengthy this month. The first thing that we're going to do, and I have to minimize this because I've got this little toolbar up there for the webinar. We're going to navigate under our library tab, under free FTC-U projects. You're going to locate May, and now when you expand May, you'll see that you actually have 2 folders. So we've got May 2016 and May 2017. May 2017 has a plus sign next to it. You're going to expand that. You're going to click on the plus sign. And then you'll notice that there are 2 what are called subfolders. One folder is called Recipe, and one is WAF. Okay, if you by accident select Recipe and come over to your Designs panel, there's nothing there. That recipe, we're going to navigate in there, and it's actually, there's a PDF file and a Word document within your project folder. So we're going to go back to our library tab. Make sure that you highlight the WAF folder because that's where the designs is. They're in WAF format. And so as you progress with the project, I will a lot of times put the WAF files within that folder. Once you have that selected, you'll come over, and this is the finished product. Now, I do want to mention this. As I was doing preparing for the webinar, I discovered that I made a mistake with this recipe towel. So if you are going to open that up and print it off and stitch it out, fix the recipe first. And as we go through the lesson, I'll show you what happened. We're going to start with our blossom frame. I constructed this in the U Design It tool. I want to emphasize, I constructed this in U Design It, and then I saved it as a WAF file. If you have the Sweet Blossom collection, you can go into U Design It and build your own design. If you don't have that collection, you will have to use this design for this month's project. We're going to bring it into the software, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to ungroup it. When you bring a design into the software, by default, it comes in as a grouped object. Now, I've done this before. I will come over to my Sequence View window. I can select a specific item in the Sequence View window. When I select it in Sequence View, then I can come over into my software and I can manipulate that. But this is a grouped object. In other words, what if I just want to select the flower? I can't do that. So the first thing that we're going to do in our software is while that's selected, we're going to ungroup it. So I'm going to come up to my ungroup icon, which is these 2 red pieces of paper overlapping with the all items selected. I'm going to click on that, and now this is ungrouped. As you ungroup a design, and when you bring in a design and you want to manipulate different things in there, a lot of times this is what I'll do. The first thing that I do is I ungroup the design so that I can get in there and select specific elements from it. But I want to demonstrate this. It does ungroup everything into specific elements. For instance, if I come up and I select this flower, and what we're going to do is we're going to move the flowers out of the way. We're going to resize this frame, and as I was working on the project, as I resized the frame, it skewed the flowers, and I thought, okay, I've got to break this apart and get the flowers out of there before I resize the frame. I'm going to select that flower and drag it over to the side. And what you'll see, let me just click on 3D right here. That flower actually has an outside which is blue and an inside which is yellow. So when you use the ungroup tool, it ungroups every individual item. So make sure that you focus on that, because as you go into a design and ungroup it, you have to be very conscientious about what's going on, because you can start pulling things apart and distorting them, and you can make a real mess of a design. And I know that from experience, because I have done that many times. All right, so I've got this design ungrouped, and now I've got to regroup the specific elements. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to draw around my flower here what's called a bounding box. I'm going to left click up on the top, and I'm dragging down, and I'm creating a box around the outside of that design. When I let go, it selects the elements that are contained within the bounding box. Once I have that selected, I'm now going to regroup it. So I can use my icon up here next to the ungroup, and this is regroup. If you highlight over it, it says group. But in the latest update to the software, we now have these selection tools around this bounding box. Now, if you're working in your software and you've done the latest update and you don't see these little icons around the outside, if you go up under your Tools menu, you're going to come down to Preferences. You're going to come over to the View tab. And under the View tab, you need to verify that you have this box right here checked for Show Selection Control. Make sure that's got a check mark in it. And if it's unchecked, put a little check in there, and now you'll be able to see those selection controls. These are wonderful. And there may be a time when you want to turn them off, but they really are a nice feature to have, because down here in the lower right-hand corner, that is actually a group icon. So I'm just going to come in and I'm going to click on that. And now guess what? My flower is grouped. So I can come in and I can manipulate that. We're going to take that flower and we're going to get rid of it. We're not going to get rid of it. We're going to remove it from the design, because I don't want to manipulate it. And I'll do this a lot of times when I break apart a design. I'll take something from the design. I'm going to do a cut right now. I'm going to open up a new piece of paper. I'm going to right click and I'm going to paste that design onto this new piece of paper. And really all I'm doing is I'm putting the design on this blank paper as a placeholder. So now as I go back in and work with this design and manipulate it, I don't have to worry about making changes to my original flower by accident. All right, I'm going to scroll back up to the top. I'm going to right click and do a collapse all so I can see the individual elements. Now you may be thinking, okay, I'm going to regroup this. And if I regroup it, what if I were just to come down here and click on this level and click on the regroup? Could I do that? Sure you can. But all you're doing is you're grouping the items within that level. And so that's the color. These little leaf elements have two colors in them. So when I regroup it, I miss picking up that yellow inside, because the yellow chrome inside is not only a component of the leaf element, it's also a component of the flower element. Let me undo. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our frame. We're going to, and I also want to urge you to do this. As you are working in the software, and I was working with a couple of ladies the other day, and I really, if you've been working in software for a while, you'll know this. Pay attention to the icon of your cursor. For instance, when I hover my cursor over the black box, my cursor changes to a white arrow, and that means I can resize that. If I want to move something while I've got it selected, I want to make sure that my cursor changes to a hand. Once you have that hand cursor, when you click and drag, that means that you can move it. So we're going to move the frame over to the side out of the way. Once we have that frame moved out of the way, we're just going to real quickly come back and regroup individually each of these elements. Now, this will make sense why I did this way in a minute, because we are going to, let me finish this. I can't talk, and you'd think I could multitask by now, but okay. We're going to resize this frame. And when I came up with the proportions for resizing the frame, I took my towel that I was going to put my project on, and I folded it, because this towel it's really not, it's a decorative towel. This is something that I'm going to take and I'm going to hang it on the front of a counter or on the refrigerator, on the front of the oven or something like this. This is really just for decoration purposes. And what I did is I folded the towel into thirds and then in half, and I measured the area. And that's what I'm going to put the frame in. Now, this is a large hoop project. If you are participating in this lesson and you are working on a smaller machine, you can still do this project. But what I would recommend is take the frame out of your project, because the frame takes up a lot of space. We're going to put the recipe and the flour and everything inside the frame, but the frame is going to take up a lot of space. And so I did have to have a large hoop in order to do this project. When I measured the area of my towel, I'm going to come over to my Transform tab, and as I measured the area in there, I determined that the area could be 7.5 inches in width, so I'm going to type in 7.5. And the height, make sure you have the checkbox for maintain aspect ratio unchecked, because if you don't, when you put 7.5 in the height, it's going to automatically update. When you put 7.5 in the width, it automatically updates the height. And we want to make these different. So the height is 11.5. And then once I've got those dimensions put in there, I'm going to click on apply. So this is the area that I'm going to put my recipe into. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work with our text. We're going to come up to our text tool, drop down, grab our text tool, come over and click to place a text holder. By default, your text always comes in reading my text, and your font may be different. What happens is that when you use the text holder, it remembers the last font that you were working in. So we're going to type in the title of the recipe, and I chose Angel Food Cake, and there's kind of a story behind it. I live in the country, and I wanted livestock, so this spring my husband let me get chickens. And I have 3 hens, and they lay 3 eggs every day. So at the end of the week, I have a lot of eggs, and I give them away, and my husband says, what are you going to do with it? And I said, I'm going to make an angel food cake. So that's the story behind the recipe for the angel food cake. I thought, oh, okay, I need to use up all of those egg whites. So we're going to type in angel food cake. Now, if you want to do a different recipe, I encourage you to do that. Maybe you don't want to do a recipe towel for angel food cake. And I have done a lot of recipe towels. I started off, my first recipe towel was actually a design that I bought, and it was a recipe for chocolate chip cookies. And I thought, you know what? That's not my mother's recipe for chocolate chip cookies. You know, you always have your own special recipe. And I thought, I want to do a recipe towel, but I want to immortalize my personal recipes, or recipes that have been handed down to me. And I actually make this a Christmas present. At Christmas, I have a lot of adult nieces and nephews, and I'll take the family recipes and I'll make recipe towels for them, and then I give them the recipe towels. So this makes a really nice gift. We're going to type in angel food cake, and now we need to pick a font for this. Now, this is another enhancement to the software. We now, a lot of times people would, and I actually saw this on a forum, I saw somebody say, what do all those little characters in front of the names of the fonts mean? And those actually are a visual cue that tells you what kind of a font that is. So for instance, if a font has an O in front of it, that means that that font will allow you to create an outline. It has options to it. A font that has BL in front of it is a bold font. A font that has a 60 in front of it is a font that's digitized to be stitched out with a 60-weight thread. AP is applique. We now have the ability to filter our font. So you've got a new box. When you click that box down, here's all fonts. But if I'm looking only for an outline font, I can now say, I only want outline fonts. And when I have that selected, it filters through the software and it gives me fonts of which I can do for an outline. If I want small fonts, then I can come into this drop down and see just the fonts that I'm looking for that are done for 60-weight thread. So this is a wonderful feature in there. The font that we're going to use is actually a handwritten font. And under the handwritten fonts, we're going to come down, and I love this font. It's Fables. So I select Fables, I click on Apply, and it's going to update that. Once I have my font updated, I'm going to move it. Well, guess what? That font does not fit within the frame of my, that text doesn't fit within the frame. I've got to resize it. And I actually had a customer ask me the question, Kathy, I don't know how to resize a font. I can't figure it out. When you're working with a font, I call this advanced text editing. And so when I place that, I've got these little characters. So I've got yellow boxes and blue diamonds. And when I have those advanced characters, this allows me, this box around the outside of the font allows me to manipulate the shape of the font. This is called a font envelope. And so I can actually manipulate the shape of the font. But the question was, how can I just resize it? You have to come over and click your select tool. Now, do you see how the box around my font has changed? Now, I can make it narrower, make it smaller. I can now resize that font. So it seems like a very simple thing, but I totally understood the question because it was one of those, well, you have to deselect it and just get the selection tool, but it makes more sense when you demonstrate it. Now, I'm going to go back, and how do I get those little, what I call advanced font editing tools back? Because I need them. You're going to come back up to your text icon, reactivate that text tool, and those will reappear for you. Let's zoom in to the text, the selection here. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take this, and this is a little tip that I learned from Walter Floriani. And when you are embroidering text, there's a connecting thread between each of these letters. And as you embroider out the text, you've got to go back and you've got to clip those. And when you are looking at this, when I'm in 3D, I cannot see the jump stitch. I can't see the connecting stitch. But when I go back into this view mode, these little dashed lines, when you're looking at a design, this was another question a customer asked, how can I see a jump stitch? That little dashed line indicates a jump stitch. What we're going to do is we're going to take the letters and we're going to click on the blue diamond and we're going to decrease the gap between the letters right here. And I'll zoom in just a little bit so you see these little connections in there. When we decrease that gap, so I select, I go put my mouse right on the blue diamond and I'm going to drag that over. And I'm decreasing the space between there. And this is a process called kerning, when you change the spacing between a font. And by kerning this, what we're doing is eliminating that space. And when we get done with this, we're not going to go back and clip the threads between each of the letters. If you've done lettering before, what you find is that if you clip those threads in there, sometimes your letters start unraveling. So, this is just a nice little tip, as I said, that I learned from Walter, and I love it, and I will always do this. I'm not going to worry about the space between the individual words, because that is a jump stitch that I will go back and cut, but I'm just looking at the spacing here between the letters. And what happens is that when you get that space down so small, and I'm going to measure it, make sure that you're in millimeters right here. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to come over, this is my ruler tool, I'm going to click on that ruler tool, and then I'm just going to come down and measure that space. And I've got my tool tips on, and so it tells me the distance there. So that's 1.1 millimeters. That's actually a pretty small stitch. Let's look at the spacing between the O's. Left click, drag over, that's a 0.5 millimeter. That stitch is so small that I'm not even going to see it. So this is called kerning. And this is just a little technique that you can use. Let's go back and finish this spacing in here. Okay, and let's get the E. Now, you may find, let me zoom out a little bit, that once you go back through here and you do your kerning, you may have to change the size of that. So this is kind of a visual thing, but I think that that looks pretty good. So I've got my title done. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the color of that to a darker color so that I can see it. All right. So now we're going to go back and we're going to add our recipe. So I'm going to once again bring in and I'm going to put in a text box. All right. Now I've provided a recipe for you. I'm going to navigate under my C drive here to the Floriani folder, to the design, to the free FTC-U Project, May 2017. Now, the folder that you have called recipe, when you open that, you'll find that there is a PDF file, and I'm just going to highlight it here, and I'll zoom in a little bit so that you can see that. If you do not have Microsoft Word, I've given you a Word document, and I've already typed the recipe. So if you don't have Word, you can actually take this recipe, you can print it off, and you can come over into your software and you can type the recipe directly into the box. I don't do that anymore, and it's because when you type the recipe in the box here, you don't have spell check. Let me go back over to my recipe here and open it in Microsoft Word. Why do I type my recipe in Word? Because Word has spell check. And as I did a recipe, and when you do a recipe towel and you're stitching out that lettering, it actually does take a little bit of time. Okay, these recipe towels, the lettering takes a while. And I was about halfway through the design, so I've been working on this design, and I've been stitching on it for probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And as it was stitching out, I glanced over to look at it, and I had misspelled the word powdered. So there was no way I could go back and fix it. I had to take the towel, and I actually take it around to my shows and demonstrate it. That is the only reason for typing it in a Word document. And if you don't have Word, you can use Google Docs, any program that's got spell check in there. So I now type my recipes before I paste them. And I'll do that with any of my text, because sometimes it's not that I don't know how to spell the word, it's a typo. I'm going to right click, I'm going to copy this text, I'm going to come back over to my recipe towel, I'm going to leave that Word document open, I'm going to put my cursor in the text box, I'm going to highlight the text that's in there, I'm going to right click and do a paste. And then once I do a paste, I'm going to click on apply. Now, right now, you're going to panic a little bit, because what I did is when I click on apply, it brings the text in the font that I've got. But I've got to change the font. Now is the time when I want to use those small fonts. So I come down under my fonts and choose small. Okay? What are my options for small? So when you look at the font, and when you highlight your cursor over here and you look at that little preview on the screen, you may not think that that font looks very pretty. Don't worry about it. These fonts are digitized, so the underlay, the density of these fonts is digitized so that when you stitch it out, you're going to have beautiful results. You don't want to resize these fonts too much, but this is a 4 millimeter font. Here's, and if you want to use a different font, you can, but I find that this Alina is very nice and clean, and we've got capital letters and we've got small letters. So I'm going to go ahead and select Alina, and I'm going to click on apply, and I'm going to make sure that this is at centered. So let's move it. I've got my hand, I'm going to drag it over in here, and I'm going to move it. I'm going to zoom in on this. Now, I mentioned to you at the beginning of the webinar that don't use the design that I gave you because there's a mistake. And here's the mistake right here. When I type the recipe in Word, Word converts the fractions for me. This font does not have fractions embedded in it. So you've got to go back in and you've got to select that 3/4 and type in a 3/4 and click on apply. And we don't want 13, so let's make sure we have a space. We also need to correct the 1/4, so 1/4. And we also need to come down. Now 1/3 came across correctly, 1 teaspoon, and the other one right here is 1 1/2. So you will need to update your fractions in there. So just check that on your recipe so that you don't make a mistake with that. And that was the one issue that I caught. So now my recipe looks pretty good. So, and when I'm doing a recipe towel, this is the other thing that I found. If you create separate blocks of text, so for instance, this is a block of text and I put my ingredients in there. I'm going to create another block of text. I'm going to go back to my Word document, and that's where I'm going to put my directions. Now, when you look at the recipe, I went into Microsoft Word, and I'm going to turn on my characters here. And what you'll see is that I put a hard return, and I formatted my spacing in Word. So I was typing the recipe, and what I found is that I needed to go ahead and manually put in the hard return so that it would space in here. And you can do it when you put in the text, but let me demonstrate to you why I didn't do it that way. Let me copy my text, let me paste it in here, and watch how long it takes this to update that. And what's happening is the software is digitizing all of those lettering for you. So take your hand away from the mouse, you'll see that my cursor right there is spinning. And I say take your hand away from the mouse because, you know, if you're like me, you get impatient. And you need to have patience with this. So it's digitizing those letters for me. So it's working. And now it's updated the text in there. So let's move it over to the side. And it has brought the text in, and the text is currently centered. I want to change that, and I'm going to left justify it. So I choose left, and I click on apply. And so I'm going to give it another minute to update that. As I said, it redigitizes everything in the background there, so you have to be patient. And when you see that spinning cursor, as I said, take your hand away from the mouse, because if you try to click and have your software do something else, then every time you click, you make another command in the software, and you just make things slower and slower. So that's why I said, take your hand away from the mouse. So let's go down. Let's zoom out just a little bit, and we're going to move this text. Got my hand. I'm going to move it down here. So now I'm just aligning things in there. I've got a little bit of an overlap right here, and by default, I don't like to resize fonts too much, but all I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that over just a little bit so that it fits within the parameters of my frame. I could also make my frame bigger, but remember, I measured my towel, and I have a defined space that I'm going to put this recipe into. Okay, so I'm just about done with this. There we go. So that's updated for me. And let me turn off 3D so that it doesn't look quite so busy. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I probably need to come back and bump this down just a little bit. And we're going to align all of this in just a minute. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to bring back our design elements here. So these little flowers, we're going to take each of these flowers and put it in their respective corner. So because we grouped them separately, I can move them one at a time. So I'm moving those back into the space. And now I'm going to real quickly do an alignment. So I'm going to, let me move up just a little bit here, and let's just get that centered in those, and I'm going to select each of those. So I'm holding down my control key on the keyboard, and I'm going to, while this one's selected, come over and select this one. Now I don't have the text selected there, just those two flowers, and I'm going to align them in the center. I'm going to drop down to the bottom of my screen. I'm going to select these two flowers, and I'm going to align them horizontally. Let me zoom out a little bit. Not only do I need to align the flowers horizontally, I also need to come back, and I'm going to select these two flowers. They're aligned horizontally, and I need to align those vertically. And as you are working in a project and you start, manipulating a design and you break things apart or add elements to it, the alignment process, I think, is very, very important. When you use the tools in the software and you take the time to align everything, it just looks better. If you don't align it using those tools, what's going to happen is that when you stitch out your design, it looks a little bit wonky. It never looks just right. So taking the time to align everything will make a difference. We're going to move these leaves back in to our design. But I want to, I like my designs to stitch out in a logical order. So if I do just a slow redraw here and watch how this is going to stitch out, those flowers stitch out in a logical order. And I'm going to, the leaf, which one is the first one to stitch out? So it starts with, let me go back here and do simulate sewing. And let's just, there we go. So the first one to stitch out is the top one. The second one is the center on the left, right, and then the bottom. As I move these back into my design, I want to make sure that I keep them in order, because if I were to, they're going to stitch in this order. So it's easier to just move them over here in the order that they're going to stitch out with a logical sense so that your design stitches out properly. So let's grab this first one. I'm going to put it right here. So I'm going to have 3 of these leaves here, 1 here, and 3 up this side. So let's rotate this 90 degrees. And I'm just visually doing that. I could use, if I undo, I could, with that selected, use my rotate tool and put in minus, you have to do minus 90, apply, and that would flip it around if you want to be very exact. I'm going to drop that right here. I'm going to grab, this is the second one to stitch out, and move that over. This is the third one to stitch out, move that over, and this was the fourth one to stitch out, and that's going to go right here. Oh, wait a minute, what am I going to do here? We'll get to that in a second. We do want to make sure that we align these. So I'm just going to move them in here, and I'm going to select these 3 leaves on the side here. So once again, I use my control key. And this tool right here is called Distribute and Space Vertically. And so what this tool does is it looks at the top and bottom elements, and it's going to distribute this middle one halfway between those. Or if I had 4 in there, it distributes them, it aligns them perfectly. So we're going to use that tool first. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we align vertically there. And I might just, with that selected, I'm using my nudge tool. I have my control key down, and I'm using the arrows on my keyboard. All right, looks good. Now, I've got this last element, and we'll align that in just a minute. I'm going to use this tool right here. Remember, it stitches in this order, 1, 2, 3, 4. With this one selected, I'm going to click Duplicate. This is going to be the 5th one to stitch out. I'm going to duplicate again and again. Now, I'm going to take This one, this is the last one to stitch out. It's the last one I duplicated. Let's transform that 90 degrees. I'm going to move that. This is the second to next one. And I'm just going to real quickly go through this because, and there we go. Okay. Now, hopefully that makes sense why I duplicated the very last item. As I said, the reason why I duplicated it that way is because it has to do with the stitch order. And if I'm logical in the way that I put the stitch order in there, I don't have to come over into my sequence view window. Let me just collapse this. I don't have to come into my sequence view window and manually fix these. And we're going to fix this in a minute. What happens is that as you add elements to a design by default, they're always going to be, they're going to come in here at the bottom of the design because this stitches out first and then those bottom elements. So let's go back. Let's fix this right here. We've got to use those alignment tools. So I'm going to align horizontally right here. And then I'm going to select left, and right here I'm going to align center, left, right, center, left, right, and let's center those up. Okay, so those are all aligned now. The last thing that we're going to do, we come back over into our design here, and here's our flower element. I want to put the flower element in my design. I certainly wouldn't want to just waste that beautiful flower. It looks so good. Let's transform that 90 degrees. Okay, and we're going to cut that. And you can transform it over here, but I'm just going to do it separately just because it makes it a little easier. And we're going to drop that right up into the top of our towel. Okay, let's move this down just a little bit. Okay, now we need to center align our title here, our design here, our ingredients, and this bottom flower. So I'm going to, using my control key, select Angel Food Cake, select flower, select ingredients, and as I said, going through and aligning those so that they're centered really makes a difference when you actually stitch out this design. Okay, now, as we went through and we added new elements to this, and let me just do a quick collapse. If I were to just send this to the machine now, I'm not going to be very happy with the way that this stitches out. This is one of those designs where it's a very illogical. So I'll stitch out this part of the design, and then the machine's, you know, it's going to tell me it's going to stop. I'm going to do a thread change. I'm going to stitch this out, and then I'm going to go back and do these other colors in there. So it's not a very logical design stitch out. But our software, of course, has, I'm going to select all items, this tool right here, and this is the color sort tool. And I've used this before. I love this tool. It examines the design. This is a miracle tool. I'm not exactly sure how it works. It's beyond my how. But what it does is it examines the design and it analyzes the elements of it. And it will, by default, reorganize elements that are similar to stitch out at the same time. It reduces those color changes for me. So as I go through there and select all items, do you see what happened? Now, this is going to stitch out in a very logical order. The last thing, though, I'm just going to take my text because I created these first, and I actually want everything else to stitch out, and then I'm going to stitch the text the very last thing. And I'll tell you why. I have to sit at my machine and do my color changes, and this stitches out pretty fast. But once I get to that text, I'm going to put my color in, and then my machine's going to stitch out the rest of the recipe, and I'm going to go leave my machine and go do something else. So I'm going to take that, and I could just select that and drag it down. This is one way to move it. I can also do a right click. I can come to move, and I can go, oh, do up, down, previous match. But let's just make that stitch out last. And watch this. I'm going to select all items, and I'm going to go back, and I'm going to do that color sort again, just in case, because I did move things around in here. So now I've got, 10 colors in there, so it probably has 10 colors in the design, and it's going to stitch out in a very logical order. And that is all we need to do with the design. So the last thing we want to do now is we want to save the design. So we have a new feature in the software. This is another thing that happened in the latest update, and it's called auto save. I'm going to go out into my tools menu, and in the past, when we're done with the design, we would come up, we'd do a file save, we'd save it as a WAF file, and we'd do a file save as, and we would convert it to the format that we needed. What we're going to do, I'm going to go under my tools menu. I'm going to go back into my preferences because I wanted to show you this. And on this very first tab that you've got in there, default save format in here. What you're going to do, this is a set this up one time. So you're going to come in under this, and you're going to choose the format that your machine reads. And so if you need a PES file, if you need, whatever format your machine reads in there. Most machines read a DST file, so I'm just going to go ahead and select DST as my default. Make sure that you click the box right here for auto save as a WAF format. The beautiful thing is that if you have that box checked, and if you have that selected right there, and let me make this match right there to DST. When I come in and go File Save, I haven't saved this yet, I'm doing a File Save, it's going to, by default, the Save As type is already selected for me. So I don't have to go back and look for that. So Save As default, I'm going to give it the name, so recipe. And then I'm going to save this onto my desktop just so that you can see this. Let me go to my desktop, and I've got a folder in here called May. And I'm going to put it in right here as recipe. And what's going to happen, I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you this, is that, let me go back to my desktop and show you what happens. Here is that May folder. And what it does is there's recipes. And so it saves it as my machine format, and it saves it with your software format. So there's no more of that file save and file save as. I love this feature. DJ, if you're listening, thank you. That was one of the sweetest things that you did for us. Okay, I do believe that's everything in the software. I just want to go back and say, when I was working on the project, you may be asking, why did I break the original design apart? Well, when I was working on this and I resized the design, I did not resize the box proportionally. So what happened is it skewed all of these floral elements in there. So the main reason for breaking that apart and then was so that I could resize the box and bring the flowers in, and I did not distort those flowers. So hopefully you've picked up something from that, breaking a design apart, regrouping it, your optimized entry in there, and exit, and all of those kinds of things. So with that being said, let's go back over into our PowerPoint and talk about the actual construction of the project. Because as I said, this is not a hard project to put together, but it was a lot of work in the software. Where you're going to find that, I already navigated through there to show you that. Make sure you go into your OS, your Floriani Design Free Projects May of 2017, and you can print off the handout for that tells you how to put the project together, and also you can print off the recipe. The only materials you need are your high quality dish towels. As I said, they're readily available, and make sure that you press and starch that heavily. As far as construction tips go, let me move my cursor out of the way here. As I said, press the towel. Now, what I'm going to do, what I also did is I took my towel, I folded it in half horizontally, and I pressed a crease into that. And then I folded it vertically, and I pressed a crease into it. This crease is going to go away. So it's an easy way to mark the center of the towel without any kind of permanent issues in there. And what it does is it created a visual center point of the towel for me. Once I had that crease in there, then I took my heat and stay fusible stabilizer and I fused it directly to the back of this towel. Now, if I'd already marked my towel with either a water-soluble marker or with my friction pen, what happens is as soon as you press your heat and stay stabilizer onto the back of your towel, either if you use a friction pen, the marks go away and you can't see them. And if you used a water-soluble pen, like a blue pen, as soon as you hit it with the iron, that mark becomes permanent. So by creating that mark with the iron, as I fused my stabilizer on the back there, those creases are still on the front of the towel. Cut your stabilizer a little bit larger than the hoop, fuse the stabilizer to the back of the towel, and use that crease to position the stabilizer. Once you have your stabilizer on the towel, then you turn it back over to the right side and you use your disappearing pen to mark where you're going to put the center of the design. So I marked the center of the towel for hooping. I hooped the towel, and one of the things that you'll notice is this is the center marking horizontally. This is the center marking vertically. But if you'll notice, I added an additional center marking, and it's halfway between. And if you'll notice, my towel actually has a little finish on it. So I centered it not from the bottom of the towel, but from the finished edge in there. So this is halfway between there and there. So this is just visual in there, hoop the towel. This gives me something to align as I go and embroider. We're going to use heat and gone topping. You could use water-soluble topping, and that would be fine, but your heat and gone topping is actually the preferred topping for a towel. What the topping does is that, especially on this project, it's going to help keep the embroidery design, those threads up off the towel from sinking into it, and your design is going to look really nice on there. And you should always use a topping, not always, but most of the time you want to use a topping with your projects. If you'll notice, I just taped my topping directly onto the towel with a little bit of embroidery perfection tape to hold it in place. You're going to complete the embroidery. So for the design, I used my regular 40-weight Floriani poly embroidery for the main design. So that's to frame your flowers and your leaves. Then you're going to replace, and remember we moved the lettering to the very last thing to stitch out. So then I'm going to put in my 60-weight thread. And as I said, the Quilters Select Perfect Cotton Plus, this thread is just amazing. It's a 60 weight, it's very, very clean, it's very, very strong. So I encourage you to look for that thread in there. And it gives it a different look because since it's finished with cotton, it has a matte finish as opposed to a high sheen. So it can give you a real different look in there. So the 60-weight thread is right in here. That's the last thing to stitch out in the design. Leave your towel in the hoop. We're going to leave it in the hoop as we go back and we clip all of our little connecting threads in there. And I actually turn off, I have on my machine a thread cutter and a securing function. And I actually like to turn those off on my machine because what happens is, especially on something like this, when you're cutting all of those threads, it gets little pieces of thread down in there, and then pretty soon my machine stops and tells me to clean it out. So if I turn it off, then I can just clip it at the very end of the project. Okay, so we're going to stitch that out, leave the towel in the hoop, and then go back while your towel is still in the hoop and clip all of your little connecting threads. These are one of the most wonderful tools that we have, and these are called hooked snips. Let me go back They are now available. This is one of our newest toolkits, and this is called the Educator Favorite Toolkit. It's brand new. It just was released in the spring. And it has these little squeeze snips with that little hook in there. It also has a stiletto. It has a surgical seam ripper. These are another one of my favorite tools, and these have a curved tip, and they're ultra sharp right there on the point. So they're curved and they're sharp. And so I actually use those. I clip the jump stitch with this. I grab my flat tweezers, and then these will allow you to get right down on top of that little thread, so you will not have any of those little fuzzies left. This is another tool in there. I love these. These are actually angled scissors, but there's a little ball point on the tip there, and if you've ever had scissors, the ball point will keep you from poking through your fabric when you're cutting things in there. So I just wanted to kind of show these if you haven't seen them. They're a wonderful feature. So you're going to clip those little jump stitches in there with all of the lettering. And as I said, if you leave this, my topping is still on the towel, and it is still in the hoop. And what that does is that it just gives you some nice stability and some tension on there for going back and clipping all of those jump stitches. Once you have that done, remove your stabilizer from the back of the towel, and the nice thing is that we use heat and stay. It removes really, really easily and cleanly. And then you're going to remove your excess topping. And I just wanted to add this tip. It's best if you use heat and gone topping, but I wanted to share with you, if you're using the heat and gone topping, a lot of people they struggle with this topping, and I was one of those. When I first started using it, I'm the kind of person that I heat my iron up. It's a heat and gone topping, so I would take my iron, I would make it hot, and I would touch it onto the heat and gone topping. And what happened is it kind of cooked the topping. So I went through this process of trial and error, and what I discovered is that a couple of tips. Number one, make sure that you preheat your iron when you get ready to remove that. Make sure it's really well preheated. And then start on the lowest setting of your iron. And you need a metal iron. And if you go through that, what happens is you start on the lowest setting, touch it to the topping. If nothing happens, if your iron's not warm enough, nothing happens to this topping. So bump your iron up a little bit warmer, and then let it preheat, and then touch it again. When you get to the exact right temperature with this topping, as you touch it in there, it removes cleanly, and it just looks beautiful. And the heat and gone topping, actually, after you wash this, that topping stays underneath the lettering in there. And this towel, no matter how many times you wash it, it's always those designs, that stitching in there is always going to look beautiful. And so heat and gone topping is the recommended topping for any kind of towels or anything with a nap or something like that. So that's the end of that project. If you create this, I encourage you to share it. Remember, we have our Floriani Embroidery Facebook group. If you're on Instagram, you can post your picture up there. If you, as you post your picture, if you type in an @Casey Farrell, it actually sends that to me. That's my Instagram name. If you put in the hashtag, so I'm posting this up to Instagram, my picture, and in the description, I'm going to do what's called #MayProject and #Floriani Embroidery. The neat thing about putting a hashtag in there, that actually gives it an identifier. So if I go back and open up Instagram and search for #MayProject, anybody that posted a project up there with that hashtag, it's going to find your picture, and then I can see it. So if you haven't used Instagram, that's just kind of a little bit, Instagram and Twitter actually kind of work the same. So that's what hashtags do. They allow us to find those things. As far as what we're going to do next month, and once again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. It's kathyf@rnkdistributing.com. And I actually already had an email about this month's project, and somebody was having issues with the PDF file, and when they printed it, it didn't print the first page. And I'm not exactly sure why. So if anybody else has that issue, it must be something with the PDF file, but let me know. I haven't heard from anybody else, and I didn't have problems printing it. In June, we're going to work with embossing. I thought that would be kind of fun. So with that being said, DJ, are you out there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can.
Okay, good deal. Great job today. Um, really enjoyed that lesson. It was very well planned out and made a lot of sense. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And did you have anything else that you wanted to
No,
share before we close today? Okay. Well,
no, just for everybody to come back in June for embossing.
yeah, that'll be fun. We get a lot of requests for embossing, so I'm sure that we'll have a lot
Yeah,
of people interested in learning more about it. So I think it's an exciting topic to do for sure. So thank you
great.
everybody for coming and attending today. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we are grateful that we can do these for you. And thank you very much, Kathy, for
Yep.
doing another wonderful job in these projects, and we look forward to seeing you guys next time. So until then, we'll see you later.
Thanks, DJ.